Yes, indeed, folks. You listen to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, Total Biscuit. Now, today's topic, the big meaty thing. Yeah, that sounds incredibly dodgy. Between the two bonds of mail time and illusion of choice is the Burning Crusade. Now, why am I talking about the Burning Crusade? Is this not perhaps the most irrelevant content you can imagine? Well, no. Because you have to always look behind you at where you've been to know exactly where you are. Unless you have the Nokia E71 with its inbuilt GPS, in which case I can just press a few buttons and know exactly where I am within 10 feet. However, since most people do not own the fancy G71 GPS phone, they may own other phones with GPS, but I can guarantee that it won't be quite as good. We will have to look behind us. Now, the TBC was actually, for some inexplicable reason, why did I just say the TBC? The Burning Crusade. Yeah, we'll just go with the Burning Crusade from here on in. The Burning Crusade has been much maligned, I must say, and I believe unfairly. It was, of course, the first expansion of WoW, and it had a lot to prove. And I believe that it actually did an awful lot of things right. And in the first segment, we're going to be talking about the content that is not raiding. Because, as you're well aware, all I really care about is raiding, and that's the big meat of the endgame content. But for our first retrospective segment, we'll be talking about all manner of things like leveling, storytelling, crafting, and all manner of things like that, as well as the dungeons leading up to level 70. Now, you can email in on this topic. Yes, I will allow you to do so. It's themurloc@gmail.com. Email themurloc@gmail.com with your comments on the Burning Crusade. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Why? Why not? Indeed. Now, let's kick off with the leveling, because, of course, that's the most relevant thing if you're starting off with an expansion. And we're going to do a direct comparison between the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King. Now, I do believe, and I think this is pretty much a universal truth, I haven't seen anyone that disagrees with this, that the Wrath leveling is vastly superior to the Burning Crusade. However, the Burning Crusade leveling was also vastly superior to the original game. It was a jump. Now, of course, we've got to look at why it was a jump. Well, let's look first at TBC over the original WoW. Now, since the Burning Crusade was a more compact experience than the original sprawling 1-60 grind, you would think that there would be a lot more properly linked storytelling. It would be clear as to where you have to go next. Now, that wasn't really necessarily the case. You did have a little bit of choice, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but most of the areas led onto each other in a logical way. Now, as regards to the questing itself, the quest chains were generally about as long. There was quite a few multi-person quests. In fact, this actually happened an awful lot. At the end of a lot of longer quest chains, you might either have a dungeon, or you might end up with a multi-person quest that could not be completed solo unless you were incredibly imbalanced at the time. Now, whether or not that was a good thing is debatable, but it has continued somewhat, although to a lesser degree, I would say. Definitely to a lesser degree in Wrath. Some people think this is a good idea. It brings the culmination and the closing of a particular thread of the story with a suitably epic battle. Yes, I did just say epic. Indeed. Some people don't believe it's a good idea because some people think that leveling should be doable solo, and that denying the best leveling rewards to people who are soloing by putting in a multi-person quest and forcing them to go with the other people, yes, I might catch a disease, is unfair. Now, I don't know, I've always faced the problem, because I'm a very slow leveler. I'm not very good at it, I'm afraid. I've always faced the issue of being behind my guildies. So what generally happens is that, since they're leveling and very busy with their other stuff, I'll end up at the end of a quest chain, find a quest that I cannot solo, and have to do it with pubbies. And sometimes that doesn't work out so well, because I'm generally behind the curve. Sometimes I will manage to get a puppy, sometimes I won't. So I understand the frustration, but I do still believe that culminating quests with an epic final battle, which generally involves more than one person, is a good idea. Because the risk matches the reward, and the amount of people and effort you have to put into it should lead on to a nice culmination of the quest, the apex of the quest, and hopefully the best reward possible. Now, Wrath didn't do that so much. Wrath made these quests more solo-friendly. There were still a few, and indeed there are quite a few. Although, what I have noticed is that a lot of the multi-person quests are actually separate. They're not the final quest in a long chain. A lot of the final quests in a long chain can actually be done solo and are done in a relatively creative fashion. So we've got things like the Zoldrak quest, where you have to go through this entire line of quests convincing them that you are a ghoul and a suitable lieutenant for their evil machinations. And you go through all manner of things, and at the end of it, you deceive the boss troll and you fight him solo. And you do so by using a rod of control to control various minions. So it's like a one-person instance. It's like it understands that there is no way that you could possibly defeat this person solo, and it would be trivial. It would be absolutely trivial for you to just sit there and DPS him down. Plus, of course, it means that certain classes don't do it as well as others. Now, by adding in these elements, you get to a situation where classes all become equal, and you can have a suitably epic encounter without the hassle of having to get other people in there. And a lot of it is very fun. I actually do enjoy the solo stuff because it is challenging. A lot of these fights have various different mechanics that take a little bit of time to master, and sometimes you screw up. Now, of course, what a lot of people will realise is that this was actually brought in with TBC. It wasn't brought in with Wrath. Indeed, if you remember, there is... I can't remember the name of the quest, but it's a daily quest that is linked to the Apexis shards. And what you can do is you can do this daily quest in Blade's Edge Mountains, and you control various minions, and there are good rewards to be had, but it is a very challenging quest. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of practice to get it right. Now, in my opinion, I would imagine that that was a prototype for this system, and it seemed to work pretty well. TBC didn't have that before that. That was actually introduced after the launch of TBC. All of these daily quests and the spicing up of that particular area was introduced after the Burning Crusade launch in a patch a lot later on. There were no daily quests to begin with. Now, as regards to the itemization of the quest items, you've got to think that the itemization on Burning Crusade loot was vastly superior to the original game. It really was. It was designed around being able to replace the gear that you had, and indeed quite early. Now, some people didn't view that as a good thing, because they thought, well, why should my Tier 2.5 and Tier 3 and Tier 2 and good items from Blackwing Lair be replaced with greens? It looks silly, and I feel like my experience was devalued. Other people said, well, this is a good idea, because it helps level the playing field, and getting new gear is exciting. You don't want to be stuck in your old gear. Now, Wrath, of course, struck a balance between the two, and I must say that looking back at it, I probably prefer the TBC system. I think they went a little bit too far with Wrath, and indeed I wasn't replacing any of my items save my trinkets until at least level 77. All of my stuff was reasonably good Tier 5 or higher level gear, and I wasn't replacing it until then. Now, to be honest, I would prefer that I was replacing it bit by bit across the levels. And in TBC, I did do that. I had some Blackwing Lair level gear, I had some Molten Core gear, I had some AQ40 gear, I had some Nax gear, and I replaced it piece by piece over the course of several levels. Now, some people view that as a bad thing, but bear this in mind. If I was wearing Tier 5, and when I hit 80, I replaced, instantly, 6 pieces of gear. Now, what did I replace them with? Crafted PvP blues. Now, what's worse? Replacing items piecemeal with greens, and getting several upgrades on your way to 70, or waiting until level 80 and then replacing all of your stuff with crafted PvP items. What's worse? Well, I actually view the whole level 80 thing as the worst option. It was way worse. And looking back at TBC, in retrospect, I would say that they pretty much got it right. Maybe they overdid it slightly. They could have bumped everything up a level the other way. But it was exciting to get new gear, don't get me wrong, and because the gear was so different and had different stats and had vastly superior statistics indeed, it was still exciting to get, even if it looked terrible. So that wasn't too shabby at all. Now, of course, we've got to also look at the crafting of TBC versus the crafting of Wrath. Now, the issue that I have with the crafting of Wrath, and I've said this before, is that there is a lack of diversity. Now, in TBC, they realised that crafting was broken, and it was. Most crafting was worthless. It could be outdone by questing gear, it could be outdone by leveling gear, it could be outdone by raiding gear, of course, and only the occasional item was useful. And as regards to making money, it was a complete waste of time. You could not make money via crafting at all, unless you had a very rare recipe. And of course, coming towards the end of the original game before the first expansion, there wasn't an awful lot of people that had rare recipes versus other people that didn't. I mean, you're looking at a situation where a rare recipe would be owned by, say, 25, 30 plus people on the server and would no longer be rare. So you couldn't demand ridiculous fees because there would be competition. So you might as well just be selling your leveling stuff. I mean, really. Just sell mithril bombs or ore or whatever. The gathering professions were all that was worthwhile. That had to change. Now, it wasn't changed by making crafting more useful as regards to selling items. No, it wasn't. Jewel crafting came in, and that could sell. Absolutely. That was the big selling profession. But with other professions, it didn't actually happen. What they did was they turned it inwards. They noticed the profession of engineering, for instance. Engineering was a terrible seller, but it had items that could buff you, and they were unique to you. So they decided, hey, we're going to expand that, and we're going to put in some various specializations, and we're going to allow you to upgrade your gear with your professions. Now, jewel crafting, of course, was an obvious one, although jewel crafting you could upgrade everything. Now, tailoring, I think, is the best example of this. And again, people are split on this. Some people think that the gear you could get by tailoring, the Spellfire, Frozen Shadow Weave, and Primal Mooncloth sets, were overpowered. And some people thought it was the saviour of tailoring. Personally, as someone who was wearing them, it was definitely the saviour of tailoring. Certainly it was a lot of work, but it gave you a reason to have tailoring. And that's something that they managed with a great number of things, blacksmithing particularly. Blacksmithing gave you access to unique weapons that you could use, and only you could use. And they were good. They were very, very good. The sword was very good. And of course, you all remember the Storm, whatever it is. You all remember the item that I can't remember. Storm Herald, of course, that was what it was. The Stunning Mace. It was very, very good in PvP, particularly in arenas. And there were various professions that offered a great number of cool things, including, of course, later on, engineering got its due with the goggles, which, rather than doing nothing, did an awful lot of damage or healing or protection or whatever else you wanted. They were great items. They were almost best in slot at the time. So it was something of a golden age for self-improvement. And it was an interesting idea. I don't think it quite worked out, but it's certainly a heck of a lot better than Professions in Wrath. Professions in Wrath have just gone down the toilet. I mean, they brought in their brand new baby Inscription, which of course people can make hideous amounts of money from via generating Dark Moon cards, and I've seen people sell these cards for like 2,500 gold each. The inscribers on our server are just rolling in it. It's not even funny. We've got a guy who's an inscriber, and he's got a Traveler's Tundra Mammoth and about 50,000 gold just from Inscription. It's insane. Whereas I've only just got my Epic Flying Mount. Yes, I did actually get my Epic Flyer today. Finally! Got my Epic Flyer and my magnificent flying carpet. But anyway, that's by the by. The problem is, they looked at stuff like Spellfire, and I call it the Spellfire problem, because Spellfire was the most blatantly overpowered set of items that you could make via crafting, more so than anything else. They looked at that and they said, we cannot have this happen again. So, they removed the ability to craft unique tailoring stuff for yourself, BOP, and they made BOE stuff. And the problem is the BOE stuff was outstripped by heroic gear, which meant that spending that amount of resources to make that gear was pointless. It didn't have set bonuses, it was rubbish. It is pretty much all terrible. The only stuff worth having, at least in my opinion, I think was the Ebon Weave gloves, which were about on par with tier 7. Aside from that, the rest of it pretty much sucks. Now, of course, that's killed tailoring as a profession, because what we're supposed to make a profit on, of course. Who knows? Bags? No. Spell thread? No. Too much competition. Can't do that. So, to be honest, regardless of its problems, I would say that the crafting in TBC was better. Now, as regards to story, and this is something I want to quickly wrap up, because I'm not big into the lore, while Burning Crusade was a very interesting place with very varied terrain, and that's something it definitely has over Northrend, the story was threadbare. It wasn't really clear as to what you were there for. You didn't have a grand antagonist. I suppose you did in the form of the Burning Legion, but you weren't really aware of what they were doing. They were around and about, you saw them quite a bit, but it wasn't like Arthas. it's blatantly obvious as you're going through that Arthas has some big plan and that he's constantly trying to impede your progress and getting involved and meddling with your stuff every step of the way. And that is incredibly positive for tying together a unified story that you feel like you're a part of. And of course, phasing really, really helps there. So I'd certainly think that's a definite advantage that Wrath has over TBC. TBC was scatterbrained. It felt all over the place, and indeed, the areas were so vastly different that I suppose maybe that was intentional. But it didn't turn out so well. Now, when we come back after the break, I'll be reading some of your emails about the Burning Crusade and going into the idea of TBC rating versus Wrath rating, and indeed versus Classic rating. My name is Total Biscuit, and you're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. I've got some testament for you. Yes, indeed, it's Disciples of the Watch. Enjoy.